Alf, we've got a fun little video today. A lot of people investing, in quotation marks, in cardboard.
Yeah.
But you know what many haven't thought about? Are sports cards performing better than non-sports cards? Or is it the other way around? We're going to take a look at some data today, dive in, and see what it tells us. A couple of funny things happened over the weekend. First off, shout out to my buddy Tim, who lives up in Maine, that sent over from Costco, I believe it was Mosaic football packs, boxes, some sort of product. And he was throwing these out there. I think they're $39.99 at Costco. So shout out to the Costco football card boxes. If you're interested, they are out there. I think there's also some sort of like Topps flagship stuff, and he sent me the pictures. So shout out to Tim. Hope all is well up north in Maine, buddy. Additionally, my New Orleans Saints have found their next franchise quarterback after yesterday's complete meltdown by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, who needed this game badly to fight for first place there in the NFC South. We got our third victory of the season, playing spoiler, but Tyler Drew Brees Shuck was absolutely clutch in this game on a roster, frankly, that just isn't very good. So it made me feel really happy about this. We have found our guy. I think Prism Football comes out in January, and I will be hunting for Tyler Shuck Gold Prisms. Let's go. If you've never submitted a PSA, SCD25 code at the shipping and billing screen gets you $25 off that first submission, just a one-card minimum to try out PSA. If you got a collection to sell, justcollect.com. I've got a fancy landing page link down in the video description as well as the pinned comments to take you there. You want to sell half the collection, all of it, they can give you an appraisal very easily there at the justcollect.com site. All right, so we're going to look at some card ladder index, player index data. But under players, yes, they've got sports athletes, but they also have characters like Wolverine, for example, where they're tracking cards for each of these characters. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to take a look at these little indexes over the last 2 years to see how they stack up against each other. There are some surprises in here. Now, let me also just throw out as kind of a disclaimer, caveat, whatever to this. This is just a piece of the pie here. This is not all the cards for these players. It is a piece of data that we can use and talk about. So when we talk about these percentages, we're talking about a fraction probably of these players or characters' cards. So let's keep that in mind. It's just a fun exercise to take a look and try to get a snapshot at what we're looking at here. All right, so let's start with a guy you might have heard of, Michael Jordan, MJ. Over the last 2 years, he has 1,843 cards being tracked in Card Ladder, are up 97% over the last 2 years. This is probably no surprise to anybody. We've had, again, I'm picking the 2 years in part because that's really been most of the bull market, if you will, where prices really kind of came roaring back after 2022, 2023. We had interest rates rise, we had card prices crash, and we had people getting out of the hobby after 2021 bozo stuff happening, all that stuff. But what happened in 2024? We saw recovery, we saw prices moving up, especially on GOATs. That's one thing that we've seen. GOATs have really moved up, and that's a lot of what I've chosen here to talk about today, and I've got some prospects too that we'll throw in. But Michael Jordan up 97% over the last 2 years, and that's across a lot of cards in Card Ladder. Lionel Messi. So here's an interesting little nugget here. Lionel Messi up 261%. Now, this is 140 cards. Obviously, Messi has a lot more than 140 cards, but it's still enough of a sample there to get an idea. Messi stuff has been going bonkers, especially after he won that World Cup title with Argentina, up 261%. I think what happened here in part is people looking at Michael Jordan cards, Tom Brady, looking at price points, and then looking at Lionel Messi and thinking like, why aren't his cards more expensive? It feels like he's undervalued. And I'm sure that a lot of people put money into Messi thinking like, you know, outside of Pele, Lionel Messi is the soccer GOAT. He's everywhere. He's still playing, and his career accomplishments are out of this world. So you have Lionel Messi up 261% over the last 2 years. Tom Brady, the football GOAT. There hasn't really been anyone to challenge Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes in last year's Super Bowl, he was there to make a statement. It would have been 3 in a row for the Chiefs. And even though he had lost head-to-head to Tom Brady in a Super Bowl, it was still an opportunity for Patrick Mahomes to kind of close that gap a little bit in the title hunt. Of course, they got absolutely smoked by the Eagles. Tom Brady up 41% over the last 2 years. So if we're looking at just kind of the GOATs here, it's a little bit lower than the others, and there could be a variety of factors for that. There's 552 cards in Card Ladder that they're tracking here, up 41%. And so it could just be that his stuff was already high. going into kind of the last 2 years. It could also be that, they're just not as popular as some of the other, like Michael Jordan cards that are as popular as basketball and baseball, etc. So Tom Brady up 41% over the last 2 years. Still not bad. Mickey Mantle only up 27% over the last 2 years. I happen to think this is just because his stuff was already up. I don't know if Mantle's ever had really much of a correction, especially on his higher grade vintage stuff. I could be wrong, but I don't think in 2022 and 2023 his stuff cratered out, coming off of like high prices. I know they moved down some, but I think he has been really steady over the last 5 years coming off the pandemic. And so Mantle only up 27%, 544 cards in card ladder. So a big swath of vintage cards there for Mantle. But again, I just think it's because his stuff was already up. So the last 2 years, it's just another 27% up essentially. Shohei Ohtani. This is basically the best case scenario if you buy prospect cards or an active player, somebody that could still get injured. There's risk obviously with some of these guys. Up 269%, even more than Lionel Messi, up 269% over the last 2 years, 91 cards in card ladder. So there's not a huge database of Ohtani cards being tracked in card ladder. It's only 91 cards, but it's enough there. Probably a lot of his bigger cards are in there, I would assume. So 269% increase for Ohtani. But again, the last 2 years, he's really separated himself as far, they've won the last 2 titles. He had his 50-50 season, and then this past season, he was out of this world too. He's back to pitching. I mean, the last 2 years have been a rocket ship for Shohei Ohtani. The reason why I think this is important is because this almost kind of, to me, represents like best case scenario for a prospect or kind of a rising prospect. When I say prospect, it's not as if this guy was a nobody 2 years ago. He was already a star, but where he really separated himself as the best player in baseball was over the last 2 years. So this is essentially 269% showing kind of the best case scenario, at least just looking at this data set. Ken Griffey Jr. up 56% over the last 2 years. That's really strong. 119 cards in the card ladder database. There's just really diehard Ken Griffey Jr. collectors. Shout out to my buddy DPZ. Big time Griffey guy. And it's just that nostalgia from the 90s, man. If you're, 40 in your 40s, you grew up watching Bonds and Griffey and these guys and, just out of this world. So Griffey up 56% over the last 2 years. How does this compare to non-sports cards? Batman. So Batman has 30 cards. Let's keep in mind here for the non-sports stuff, there's not going to be as many cards in the data set as what we see on the sports card side. So we have to keep that in mind. And really, for a lot of these characters, they don't have near as many cards or parallels as these athletes do. Batman up 47% over the last 2 years, 30 cards being tracked in the card ladder database. C-3PO, get this, up 94%. Now, hold on. There's only 13 cards being tracked, but still 94% for C-3PO cards. Darth Vader, on the other hand, big time character, up 8%. He's been pretty flat over the last 2 years. But again, I'm assuming if we're going back in time and comparing over the last 5, if you go out a little bit further, 5 years, then his cards are probably way up over 8%. But over the last 2 years, 125 cards being tracked in card ladder, up 8%. Luke Skywalker over the last 2 years, up 40%. 69 cards being tracked in card ladder. And so right there, we just named off 3 Star Wars characters: C-3PO, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker. I know the Han Solo, the Harrison Ford stuff has gone up quite a bit. The Han Solo autographs and things like that have gotten expensive. Star Wars cards as a whole, and I think a lot of that, Star Wars cards as a whole have really gone up quite a bit. We just saw that PSA 10 Skywalker rookie card going back to 1977. That one went for like 250 grand or something wild. But also, just if you look at Topps and a lot of the new products, their big focus, their non-sports card releases, they've got a bunch of Star Wars releases, and there's a lot of people getting into breaks for those. I know Mama Breaks does a lot of Star Wars stuff. They're popular new products, and that probably also helps the vintage stuff, which brings me to the next character, if you will, and it all kind of ties in together. John Cena. WWE is kind of like the off sport, it's like alternative sports-ish. But WWE stuff has gone ballistic over the last 2 years. Wrestling cards, super, super popular these days. Just wrestling in general has gone nuts. It's now on Netflix. It's really gone ballistic. John Cena cards up 81%. Again, 13 cards, so only 13 cards in card ladder. So we don't have a lot of different cards there being tracked, but still, I think that shows that of the cards being tracked, it's up to 81% over the last 2 years. It's pretty significant. Now, this one kind of shocked me a little bit. We're talking about surprises here. Hulk, yes, like the Marvel character Hulk, Stan Lee creation, down 55% over the last 2 years. And 100 cards are being tracked. So it's not as if this is like 2 cards or 5 cards. 100 cards being tracked in card ladder, and Hulk is down 55%. I have to assume that part of this are the PMGs. You know, the PMGs were very expensive going back when Aoki was buying these up, and then they've come down dramatically, like 70, 80, 90%. I'm assuming that must be part of what this number is, but the Wolverine, for example, the next character we're going to look at, is up 24%. So you would assume, I would think, that Wolverine, if the PMGs fell for Hulk, that they also fell for Wolverine, because they did. But Wolverine as a whole, up 24%, 179 cards being tracked in card ladder. So it's interesting. This one will kind of shock you a little bit too. Ghost Rider. I love Ghost Rider. I actually just bought a Marvel Spotlight comic number 5, which is the first appearance of Ghost Rider from Hakes Auction. Shout out to my friends over at Hakes. Ghost Rider cards up 107% over the last 2 years, 25 cards being tracked, so not a lot of cards, 107% increase. Let's talk about that for a second. So we look here, Darth Vader basically flat, Wolverine up 24% is okay, but Ghost Rider's up 107% and C-3PO is up 94% over the last 2 years. It shows me that on the non-sports side, at least, people have gravitated towards like, okay, like the main character is very expensive, but who are some of those supporting characters that are also really cool? And it shows me, I think, that there's just collectors that have gotten in on that non-sports side that are focusing in on not just the main characters like Spider-Man and Wolverine and Batman and so forth, but also looking at some of the supporting cast, if you will. So that is pretty awesome. All right, we're going to go back to sports just for one other athlete. It's A'ja Wilson, WNBA MVP. She's probably the best player in the WNBA right now. Up 278% over the last 2 years. That's 11 cards. So again, in card ladder, not lots of cards being tracked there, but 278%. Really a lot of this, so if we look at the last 2 years, on the back of Caitlin Clark hype, A'ja Wilson and WNBA cards were an afterthought before we had the Caitlin Clark craze. Some people might fight me in the comment section about it. It's just reality when you look at the data. Not saying that Caitlin Clark is the greatest player of all time. She's coming off injury. Who knows how it's going to be next season for Caitlin Clark. But the wave of hype that came with Caitlin Clark, I think what happened is people that are card collectors, they looked at all the Caitlin Clark pricing and they're like, okay, but she's like a rookie or second year. Like how? What about the other players? Like who are the other great players in the WNBA? A'ja Wilson right at the top of the list, and it's clear that people have been buying those here over the last 2 years, and they have gone up pretty drastically. So I thought this was an interesting list. There's some that make sense. There's some surprises looking at that card ladder data. And again, it's kind of a snapshot. It's not everything. It's not all the cards or all the sales, but it gives you a snapshot. It's something to work with that we can talk about and debate. Friends, have an amazing week ahead. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.